What I would like us to understand by studying this content is the relationship between Ogun and Shango, esoterically, Mars and Uranus, elemental, iron, and zinc. What does this mean for us in how we observe the changes we're facing in our life along the Aquarius Pluto timeline that pulls off of how we relate to our own Uranus impulse? This is about galvanization. Galvanization. So wherever we have iron themes, Mars themes, Ogun themes running in our timeline of life, there has to be galvanization in order for us to make it into the future. Preservation of the self authentically, so that the identity is not obscured, corroded, rusted, decayed, or just simply inoperable. This video share is by Nerd Rage, How to Galvanize Metal, for educational purposes only. For educational purposes only. Fair use. Listen up.
Fellow nerds, as many of you know, rusting is a problem for a number of items made of iron. While using better metals like stainless steel alloys is one option, another is to protect them by zinc galvanization. In this video, we're going to do just that. First, make a solution of zinc sulfate by simply mixing 30 grams of zinc sulfate with 100 milliliters of water. Now here are the two clean iron nails we're going to perform this experiment on. I will plate one of them and leave the other as a control experiment. These clips lead to a 5-volt power supply off camera. Take the nail and clip the negative terminal of the power supply to it. Now with the positive terminal, clip it to a strip of zinc metal. Place the two electrodes into the zinc sulfate solution and make sure they don't touch. Now turn on the power and run the current for about a minute or two. The positive terminal with the zinc strip is dissolving and putting zinc ions into solution, while the negative terminal is reducing the zinc ions and plating them onto the nail as zinc metal. Some hydrogen is also released and can be seen as the bubbling around the nail. After about a minute, turn off the power and remove the electrodes. You can see here the distinct coating of zinc metal on the surface of the nail. This is what we call a galvanized nail. Now let me bring it over to the microscope. Here are the two nails, the galvanized one at the bottom and the untreated nail at the top. The galvanized nail has a rough coating of tiny zinc crystals that give it a slightly lighter appearance compared to the untreated nail. The coating is not perfectly continuous with the whole nail, but it doesn't have to be. Let's test the rust resistance. Take a dish with a paper towel soaked in dilute salt water. Then we place on it the two nails. Put them about a centimeter or so apart and cover it to prevent evaporation. This setup exposes the nails to air and water, the two required components for rusting. Now we just leave it overnight. Here we are the next day. We can see the nail on the left is rusting and leaving behind iron oxide on the paper towel. The galvanized nail on the right doesn't seem to be damaged that much, if at all. Let's take a look at it under the microscope. You can clearly see the rust on the untreated nail. The galvanized nail at the bottom instead has this white powder. In truth, actually both nails are corroding, but in the galvanized nail, the zinc metal corrodes first because it's more reactive, and produces this white powder of zinc hydroxide and carbonates, essentially zinc rust. That's why some old galvanized poles, sheeting, and fences have this white crust on them. It's actually zinc hydroxide and carbonate. Now when the zinc corrodes, it gives off electrons that go into the iron and give it a negative charge. This negative charge prevents the iron from rusting, so even though the zinc does not cover the whole object, the electrical charge does, and thus you don't need to completely galvanize an object in order to protect it. You just need to galvanize most of it, and even those exposed parts will still be protected thanks to the negative charge. That's why this nail is almost completely rust-free. Now galvanization does not last forever. Eventually the zinc itself will be completely used up and the rusting will set in again on the iron. Nonetheless, it's still a very long time and can last years. Now nails can be bought already galvanized, but you can use this technique to galvanize just about anything made of metal, so feel free to experiment. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, rate, and comment.
We've seen what happens already when you're not galvanized. You immediately suffer death and regeneration through Scorpio over and over again. The long, grueling process of having to heal yourself, bring yourself back to life. When you step into that Mars, Aries, Scorpio aspect of the self that carries the authentic identity. How do we survive this? It's through Uranus. Uranus knows exactly where to pick you up from. When the timeline of conformity, normalization has exhausted itself, and your meaning and your evolution of self and in the story and theme of your life has to go into territory that may not be orthodox or that may not be part of public opinion or acceptable to the people traditionally around you, where they have ideals of you, concepts, opinions, desires, aspirations that you yourself don't have for yourself. Part of your story is outside of the box. Part of your story is in a different direction than what may have been traditional or what people are used to. And now you have to find a way to have a pulse, to not lose yourself in that. And Uranus has enough electricity to keep you vibrant, bold, unaffected, very comfortable in future timelines that you're promised to. Revelation from heaven. They're not going to understand now, but they'll catch up. And that's exactly how Uranus works. Nobody ever understands Uranus when it sends that bolt of electricity, but over time, people catch up.
Galvanizing. And we normally galvanize steel, which is an alloy of iron used in many building materials. So when iron reacts with oxygen and water, it rusts to make iron oxide. Now the reason this is a problem is that iron oxide is that orangey red stuff that is really flaky, and that means that the material isn't as strong and as tough as it was before. So what we can do to protect this is we can take our steel bar and we can coat it in a layer of zinc. Now the reason that that works really well is because that layer of zinc can stop any of the oxygen and water getting to the iron beneath it. The second method that we're going to talk about is something called sacrificial protection. And in this, you take your steel bar and instead of coating it entirely with zinc, what you can do is you can just put zinc strips down the length of the bar. Now what's really interesting here is that even though I've got loads of iron that's still exposed on the surface, the steel, or the iron in the steel, won't rust. It won't form iron oxide. And that's really weird. The main reasons behind this are that zinc is more reactive than iron. So because zinc is higher up on the reactivity series, it means that the zinc will react with the oxygen preferentially over the iron. And this means that the iron doesn't rust. Let's check that out in a little bit more detail. The basics are that iron, when it rusts, becomes iron oxide. And we talked about how that was super flaky and a bit of a pain. Zinc, when it reacts with oxygen, forms zinc oxide, which is also a really hard and strong material. So that's really not a problem. So ideally, for my building material, I want the zinc to react with the oxygen over the iron. Now, what you might be saying is, so does that mean that the oxygen just gets attracted to the zinc, kind of like it's magnetized there? And no, that's not true at all. It's not like the oxygen can decide where it's going to approach and what it's going to react with. If it's on the surface, then the oxygen may very well react with the iron. If the oxygen does react with the iron, then it will form iron oxide, that horrible stuff that flakes that we don't want. So how does the zinc help with this? Well, what the zinc does is, because zinc is more reactive on that reactivity series, even if the iron reacts and forms iron oxide, what it can do is it can displace it and steal the oxygen back to form zinc oxide and iron back again. Zinc being more reactive is absolutely crucial to this method working. You could use other metals that are more reactive than iron, but zinc is the most readily available and the cheapest option. So if we look back at our diagram, what we can see is that all of this surrounding iron is also protected by that way more reactive zinc that's nearby. Now, one of the ways that makes this really, really cool is if we look back at the example of galvanizing steel. Now, if I've got galvanized steel and it gets scratched, that zinc layer that we talked about gets scratched, what happens then? Now, the answer is that nothing happens, because even though the oxygen and water can now reach the surface of the iron, the zinc now protects that steel through sacrificial protection. So because it's nearby, it can still protect the iron that's near it. And that's really cool. So there we go. That's the two main methods for protecting iron from rusting using zinc.
Take notice that in the galvanization process is protecting iron from the adverse effects of air and water. Especially when salt is involved. Now, in current transit, we have Mars going through Cancer, and Cancer being a lunar algorithm, it is an algorithm that represents the element salt. It represents salt. Understand? Salt is an accelerant toward rust when it comes to iron. It accelerates that process. So what do you think is happening to your Mars in a debilitated state as it's going through Cancer? It's as if the iron aspect of yourself is rusting away. This is why you have to get in touch with your Uranus expression, the Uranus attributes of the self, the Aquarius expression, the Aquarius attributes of the self, in order to galvanize that Mars from corrosion and rust. The air represents the three relationships. Gemini, ethereal with self. Libra, ethereal with others. Aquarius, ethereal with society. That causes rust and corrosion to your Mars. Water, Cancer represents emotionality with the self and inner child. The mother. Scorpio, emotionality between you and others who you are in intimate terms with. Pisces, your emotional burdens between you and society, the world overall. Again, water and air causes rust. Pluto is in an air sign, Aquarius, so the galvanization is required to move the Aries North Node download that we carry with us, which has to express itself through Mars. However, the tip of the knife called Aries has to be galvanized, otherwise it's going to rust and corrode. We are galvanizing the tip of that knife, Aries, because that is what we're leading with from now on, divine masculine. Galvanization. Following up about Mars and also Uranus, it's going to be important to take into consideration because the timeline we are in has a stronger compatibility with Uranus rather than Mars. The timeline we were coming out of, Capricorn Pluto, was very much compatible with Mars, as Mars is in an exalted expression when it comes to Capricorn. It is quite repetitive in the same way that a fractaled atomic structure is repetitive. Mars knows exactly what to do. Wash, rinse, repeat. When it comes to innovation, Uranus has to succeed. So what am I talking about here? What I'm talking about here, let's first understand that Uranus represents the element zinc, in the same way that Mars represents the element iron. I like to recognize Mars as Orisha, Ogun, god of war, and Uranus as Orisha, Shango, Obashango, king of thunder and lightning, also a warrior. Shango is the ascendant of Mars. Shango comes in when there's an advancement in the warfare that Mars is dealing with. And as I'm speaking about all of this, I'm talking about you. Pay attention. Biologically, as you've heard me say before, first in our biochemical process is iron. An advancement of what iron is dealing with, zinc, takes over to preserve the efforts of iron. It's very much like the special forces that comes in before or after the troops who take over the basic warfare, the infrastructure of warfare, and you have troops, special forces that comes to do the advanced details. Uranus represents those advanced forces or details that comes in. Now, what I want to help us to correlate with Uranus and Mars, iron and zinc, is that this relationship is called galvanization. Galvanization. When you look in your natal birth chart or in the transiting charts, the relationship between Mars and Uranus is a galvanization. That is what it is all about. There's a unique relationship between Mars and Uranus. Uranus is there to galvanize Mars. 9 times out of 10, I showed the video first so that you can get an understanding. You know, I got a very good video that I found called Jungle, explaining galvanization process in zinc. You know, now that you've heard that, I don't have to give the whole spill scientifically or biochemically and how that works. Now, when you're considering galvanization in the chart, Mars represents the iron, okay? The iron activity that's going on in your chart internally, you know, in your reality. Mars is the creator, okay? It actively creates the intent, the will, the inclination, the impulse of the heart. Mars is there to put into action and to materialize what the heart is inclined to express. Mars is there to deliver that. And it's also there to defend through Scorpio. It builds and creates through Aries and the fire trine. It regenerates through Scorpio and defends through Scorpio, Mars. Understand? Now, when Mars gets to a point where it has created, what comes after creation? You guessed it. Innovation. Innovation. I'll give an example. You have somebody who created the car, right? And they have somebody who comes along and innovates different types of cars based on the original concept of the car. The original concept of the car is what was created. The different type of cars that come after that, that is innovation. Understand? Understand? So, what Uranus does in your chart, it's not there to initiate or run a timeline. It's there to make sure that what you are creating, that it has longevity. And make sure that your purpose has longevity. Uranus is there to make sure that your identity has longevity. It is there to give longevity to everything that relates to Mars, Aries, Scorpio, first house, as well as your Mars placement. This, of course, includes the transiting course and expressions, interactions of Mars. Uranus is there to make sure that it does not run into a creative situation that binds it into rusting and corrosion, to where what you are producing and creating no longer has a way forward into the future. Who you are overall. Uranus is what reconnects you to your most authentic expression at the core, which goes with the sun. It reconnects you from the core of who you are authentically, deeply within the self. So as Mars is creating what the heart's impulse is willing into existence, you run into timelines that come to end. Timelines begin and timelines end. And because timelines begin and end within the time continuum that Saturn split from heaven, Uranus has to be there to succeed the efforts of Mars from one timeline to another. You come to a junction of a track to where you have to switch to another track to get a continuation of the timeline. That is where Uranus comes in at, and that is where you have continuation, you have preservation. You overcome and you find victory at the point of corrosion, the point of rusting. Shango comes and suddenly changes course, suddenly hits you with events, situations, circumstances that turns you left, right, up, down, whatever direction that you have to be, change course. Something has to end, something has to begin, suddenly this, suddenly that. It is the lightning that makes sure that your course is heading straight for the fulfillment of your destiny, your purpose. Your life story remains consistent over many timelines, over many lifetimes, not just this lifetime. Uranus is on top of all of that. And it's through the power of innovation, the power of shock, unorthodox, unpredictable, switching, changing, adjusting, sudden shocks and shifts. This is what preserves Mars. This is what sends the works of Mars into the future, is Uranus. You built all that, you created all that, you sacrificed, you did this and you did that. Now you come to a fork in the road or a big ass wall. What are you gonna do? It's over? No, not if Uranus can help it. It's not over. Uranus is the shock that takes you from running on, okay, you're running on 2 cylinders, 4 cylinders, 6 cylinders. Uranus kicks in, you're running on 8 cylinders, 12 cylinders. I mean, you're gaining the, it's like NOx. It's like the rocket booster. You accelerate forward with an alignment of a consistent unfolding of your destiny. And Uranus keeps you on course with that. Everything with Mars is subject to rust. It's subject to corrosion because of time. It's subject to the laws of death and life. Because again, Mars also hosts Scorpio and Pluto, which carries the laws of death and life. And because it carries the laws of death and life, something has to preserve it. Something has to give it immunity to that process, to outlive that process. And that is only Shango. That is Uranus. Zinc. It does the same thing in the body. You have iron that's at the basis of the immune system. When shit pops off and it gets too accelerated, too troublesome within the body, that is when zinc comes in to kill all that noise. Zinc comes in and destroys and pulverizes the infiltration of viral infections. That is zinc. So to make this make better sense, what we're going to find is that we were used to relating more with our Mars to get us through, to create our reality. But now we're going to have to start identifying more with our Uranus on behalf of Mars. So the things that we were used to operating on, the conscious frequencies that had us to get used to and become familiar with how our Mars operates and the house that our Mars originates from in our natal birth chart, that is now going to become a secondary disposition that we have, because now the primary goes to Uranus rather than Mars. We're going to be taught how to tap into our Uranus even more so than our Mars because of galvanization. We have to be galvanized to make it through the timeline that we have arrived at. We are surviving deaths, plural. We're surviving deaths, plural. This is after the point of resurrection. Now rebirth has to take place concerning the number 9, Virgo, at the South Node. All of this represents the overcoming of deaths, plural. Scorpio has been hosting our most recent transformations over and over and over again. Even Juno, which is going into Sagittarius, by the end of this month, Juno is going to get a taste of Sagittarius and go right back into Scorpio. Scorpio has been hosting the majority of our changes and transformations because that amygdala has to get programmed properly. That fight or flight. Because the fight or flight is the office of Mars. Understand? North Node Aries has already been downloaded, which is the algorithm of Mars. We are in a timeline of Mars. However, we have to relate to our Uranus in order to be galvanized to make it through without falling, without spoiling, without backtracking, without falling back into the timeline from whence we came, because that is the same as death. Abort mission. To continue forward progressively, successfully, we have to have galvanization. Uranus has to cover our Mars. Uranus has to defend our Mars. Uranus has to speak for our Mars in some cases. So what you're doing essentially is you're covering that iron with that zinc coating, which is galvanization, and it preserves the life of that Mars. So now the Mars that we're used to is now being covered with zinc. And whenever we utilize that Mars, it's going to carry attributes of Shango, the shock, unorthodox approaches and ways of existing, innovative ideals and techniques, and how we're moving and maneuvering through our realities. Thinking outside of the box, being different, being unique, strangely unique even. Dancing to our own beat, being original, innovative, and especially authentic, having shock value because we identify more with truth. There's a lot we're going to have to learn about how to work with our Uranus, our Aquarius, as well as our Saturn, because this represents Aquarius energy, natally and in transit. Because from here on out, we are galvanized. You go way, way back in history, where just bare iron was used and they coat the iron with tar or paint. It only worked but so long. But it is revolutionary and innovative, futuristic even, to coat iron with zinc. And it damn near lasts forever. To galvanize iron. And that is what we're learning to do in a spiritual sense, in a conscious sense, in a cosmic sense. It's to galvanize every aspect of ourself that carries iron. Mars, Aries, Scorpio, 8th house, 1st house. Galvanization is taking place here. So we're no longer carrying the rusty brown image in the 1st house, 8th house, Scorpio, Aries, Mars natal placement. But now we have a shine, a luster of that zinc. A coating that makes that iron as if it were eternal. Preserving and extending the life with legacy through Uranus. And that is the extension of life, the legacy that we leave by the power of wisdom, mastery, and service to humanity. Galvanization. It's going to take a great deal of self-acceptance It's going to take a great deal of learning how to nurture and comfort the self against rejection and abandonment, ridicule, people laughing at you, calling you crazy. You're going to have to get used to it if you're going to be authentic, if you're going to be real. No one has ever been authentic without being laughed at. No one has ever been authentic without being criticized for it, called crazy. Genius is not possible without walking through humiliation, shame, and rejection. You will never experience your genius. You will never be able to share your genius with the world if you're ever afraid of rejection. When you step outside of Mars, which is actions and creativity that other people are able to cognitively contemplate, recognize, understand, and relate to, if you can't step outside of that into Uranus, which is heavenly revelation in your creations, which is called innovation, going against the grain, doing what hasn't been done, challenging and testing the faith and experience or confidence of others, you're not ready to receive and enjoy the benefits and blessings and fruits of your own genius. Your genius is behind you looking crazy. Your genius is behind everybody walking away from you. That's where your genius is at. And you have to get galvanized to survive that. People will accept you for your Mars, but they will reject you for that Uranus. The Uranus, oh, that's just too much. Oh, that's just crazy. What is this guy on? What is this girl on? That makes no sense. Oh, that's just ridiculous. Oh, that's just stupid. Did he get his medication today? Why would you do that? Oh, that's just absurd. You're such a troublemaker. Why can't you just be like everybody else? You got to get used to being galvanized. And being galvanized is to be touched with the reputation of having lost your mind, of not knowing what you're doing, of being crazy. Every genius had to suffer it. But this is where we're at. Unorthodox.